Hi everyone. Uh, this is going to be a walkthrough video of my Notion GTD template, which is the template that I've been using for almost 3 years to manage my tasks with the Getting Things Done system. This is going to be a brief walkthrough, so I won't cover much of the details of the system or the philosophy behind why things are done the way they are. And for that, I'd suggest that whenever you have the time, you go and read the book Getting Things Done by David Allen to get a lot of details and a lot of context and background on how the system works and why it works the way that it does. But until you're able to do that, I think uh, this video should serve as a good starting point, along with the details I've written in the how to use this template page, which will go into a bit more detail than what I can cover in this video. This video is going to be a quick walkthrough of how you can get started with the system, and yeah, hopefully this helps someone who wants to just who's already aware of either getting the GTD system or just wants to get started quickly. This video can serve as a good starting point, and then you can read through this page. But my advice is the book is the best source of information on the system and how you can use it to be more effective in both your life and work. And the level of detail that the book gives on the system and how it works and why it works is, I think, really important as the next step in managing your productivity with it. Because once you understand why the system works, you can then go ahead and customize it to suit your own workflow, similar to what I've done and similar to how this template works. Because this does not follow the GTD system exactly, but it takes the foundational processes from the system, and I've sort of modified it in a way that works best for me and hopefully works well for others as well, at least as a starting point. So to get started, right, once you've cloned this template, you'll have a list of you'll have a bunch of examples listed here, but uh, in this video, let's start from the beginning, right? Like, how does the Getting Things Done system work? What are the 5 steps that are part of the system, and how do you use this template with the system to sort of organize your task list, your to-dos for both life and work? So the first step in the GTD system is, I think, one of the most important ones, and that's the step where you need to build a habit. And I think everything starts there, which is the capture step. The capture step essentially means that anytime you get a new task, right, whether it's a colleague of yours that's passing by and just randomly tells you, okay, can you please help him with something? Your boss walks by or emails you for a certain report on a certain date. Your significant other tells you something that needs to be done around the house, or just like another example would be an email that you received from someone for something that they need from you, anything. So any source of tasks for you, anytime you get a new task, just write them down in what the GTD system calls the inbox, which is where all of your tasks go initially, right? uh, the point of that is, as soon as you get something that you need to do and you put it in that list, you are now free to sort of forget about it in some sense. Like, it does not need to occupy your mental space until you get it done. You've offloaded that part to the GTD system, to whatever list that you're using as your inbox list. And so that list can be anything. It can be a post-it note that you have on your side, or it can be your reminders app on your iPhone. And it can be multiple things. For example, for me, it depends if I have access to a computer, right? If I'm on my laptop, and then I would most likely put it in the inbox of my Notion GTD system. If I am on my phone, I'd probably just put it in Apple Notes. If or sorry, Apple Reminders. If I'm driving, for example, I would ask Siri to create a reminder. But in some place, you need to put some information or a reminder for yourself that there's a task that you need to do. So let's look at a couple of examples. Let's say a light bulb uh, stops working in your home office and you now need to replace it at some point. It's not an immediate concern because it's one of the few light bulbs you have, but you still need to replace it. So I'd go into my inbox and create a reminder for myself saying order light bulb for office. Uh, let's say another example is you realize that you need to get the outside of your house painted before summer starts. Get outside of home painted. Another example is you realize that you need new curtains or blinds for the baby's room. So you'd record it like this. And something that maybe happens once or twice a week is you remember that you need to buy the milk, and so you just say buy milk. Now, one thing I think is important to point out here is we've added 4 different things, but they're all very different in how complicated or difficult they are to do, right? Like ordering a light bulb, getting milk, relatively easy. Getting blinds, somewhat complicated. There's a couple of steps. Getting the outside of your home painted, even more complicated. And then you can have even more complicated examples. So buy a new car, get a new mortgage, enroll in a university. So, but the point is, anytime something comes up that's a to do in your life or work, you would record it here as a first step, so that you can get back to doing whatever you were doing before, and that task no longer occupies space in your mind. You no longer have to spend energy trying to remember that. So that was the first step in GTD. Then the second step is clarify, and that happens at a regular cadence. So, for example, you can do it once every day. You can do it once every week. You can do it a couple of times a week. For me, I get to the clarify step at least a few times a week, and the way that works is you go through your inbox and then you figure out what you need to do for each of these things that you added. So if the thing that you need to do is simple and takes, let's say, 5 or 10 minutes, you just do it and remove it from your inbox. So for example, order a light bulb for office is something I can just do quickly on my mobile. I open up Amazon, I order a new light bulb, and that's it. It's done. I then delete. Great. Get outside of home painted. Now that's something that's going to need a couple of steps, and that's where the clarify step is of the GTD system really shines, because it forces you to think about what you need to do next. Like, what is the immediate next action that needs to happen, and based on that you then figure out where you capture the information of what needs to happen next, right? So for example, in this for this task, getting the outside of your home painted, the way I would organize it, I would add a new project for it. So let's do that. I'd add an area of life as well. Just like life is like a general catch list of everything else that doesn't fit in any of these other categories. You will create your own categories as you start using the template. But so you create a new project for it, and then you need to now think about what's the first step. And I think a good example of a first step would be to sit with the other people who live in our house and figure out what color of paint you want, for instance. For me, that would be my wife, and so I'd say there's no due date on this. As I talk about in the document on how to use the template, you only add due dates to tasks that have that has some uh, there's some penalty for not doing it on that date. So for example, if you have to file your taxes, right, if you don't file them before the due date, or if there are bills that you have to pay, if you don't pay them by the due date, you're going to end up being fined or getting in legal trouble or whatever. So a due date should signify things that have consequences if they are not done by that date. So one of the important things that the GTD system talks about, the book talks about, is don't use due dates as a replacement for reminders. Like you want to be reminded that you need to do this thing, don't use due dates for that. Contexts are, we'll get to contexts when we get to see how and when we start working on these tasks. But context are, to give you a quick summary, are kind of like the situations or the times that you would like to be reminded of this task. So for instance, I could select the home context for this because this is something that I would most likely do when I'm at home. But you can also create contexts for people, for significant people in your life. So for instance, you might have a context for your boss, and you might have a context for your wife. So let's create one here. You would most likely name this context to be the name of the person. But yeah, let's just say wife. And we'll see how this helps later on. Now, about the status. So there are 3 statuses for any task in getting things done. Planned is something that you can work on. You can start working on immediately. It's not something that's blocked by someone else. It's not something that you can't work on until something else happens. It's also not something that you're waiting on someone else for. So for instance, if there's a task that you need to do, but there's a dependency on a colleague of yours and you cannot start until that colleague has finished their work, that task would have a waiting status. The reason for that is you can't really take action on that, and so you don't want to see that task in your list of next actions because you can't really do anything about it. And someday maybe tasks are, you can call them aspirational tasks, but these are things that essentially you hope to get to someday, and these are things that you're not sure if you want to do. So for instance, a good example of a someday maybe task would be, for myself as an example, would be learn to play the piano, or learn to scuba dive, or whatever. So these are these inspirational things that or like long shots that you maybe want to look at sometime in the future, but and you want to capture them in your system so that you don't forget, but they're not something that you're planning to do anytime in the near future. You haven't planned to do these things. These are sort of just reminders for yourself to get to someday if you want to. Okay, so back to the example. So the first thing that you would want to do for getting the outside of your home painted is discuss the color to use. Great. Now, as far as the GTD system suggests, you would most likely stop there and not add other things, because there should be one clear next action to take for each project. And in this case, this is the first action that you should take here, right? But for myself, what I like to do is, just because I'm in this state of breaking the project down into its subtasks, figuring out what other things I need to do, I would add a few things here. So for instance, find 5 different companies that can do the painting and ask them to quote ask them to provide a quote for this job. I know that that's something I need to get to once I figure out exactly what color I need to do. But importantly, it's not something that I can work on. It's something that I'm adding here just as a reminder to myself. Once this the next action for this project, which is discussing the color, is done, I need to figure out what. I, this is just a reminder for myself, like this is the next step after that. Another thing would be, say, finalize company to do the job after receiving quotes. And you can add other things that you see, that you think of as you're building this. But the important thing is, most projects should have a clear next action. Now, it's certainly possible that there are projects that will have multiple actions that can be done parallel, and then in that case, you should have multiple actions in the planned state. But most projects have like a sequential list of things that you need to do: A, then B, and then C. In that case, you would have one planned action, and the rest are sort of serve as reminders of what you can do next. All right. So that was the clarify stage for this task. So now that we've clarified this, let's delete this because we've removed this from the inbox. And similarly for these two things, you'd do the same thing. You'd get blinds for baby's room, you'd get a project for it, and potentially add a few next steps. And buy milk, you would either go out and buy milk now, but let's say you don't, right? How do you capture just a simple task? And for that, you don't need a project. What you need is just a new task that says buy milk. Context for me would be shopping, because this is something that I need to do while I'm out shopping. There's no due date on this, again, because now this depends, right? This depends on your circumstance. If this is milk that you need to get so that you can have breakfast tomorrow, or your kids can have breakfast tomorrow, then you need to do this today. But in most cases, if you don't get it now and you get it like a day after, wouldn't matter, and so you would not add a due date here. And yeah, so that's the capture and clarify step, and also the organize step. So these three things kind of the two things, sorry, clarify and organize, kind of go together. So to recap, capturing is when you add anything that comes to you as a task or a to-do into your inbox. Clarify is you go through your inbox regularly, once a day, 2 or 3 times a week, whatever works for you, and you then think about what's the immediate next that needs to happen to finish whatever it is that's been assigned to you, the task that you added to your inbox. Organize is figuring out where to put that information in your system. It can either be create a new project. You can maybe thought of something that you needed to do for an existing project and you put it in your inbox. And so in that case, organize would be to attach that task to an existing project. And then the next step after that is engage, and this is where the work happens. This is when you want to figure out what you should do next. And the way that works is there is this view on the dashboard of the Notion GTD template, which shows you tasks that are filtered by two things. One is tasks that have a due date that is either before today, or it is the due date is empty. We'll see why that the due date empty filter is there. It should only show you tasks that are not done, and it should show you tasks that are in the planned status. So what that does is it shows you tasks where the due date is either before today, like it's either today or before today, or where there is no due date. So if the due date is if you assigned it a due date but it's in the future, that task will not show up here because it's not due until some future date. But if you have not assigned it a due date, that means that is a thing that you can work on sort of immediately, and it shows up here. And so usually what you would do is you would use this list, the what can I work on today, or the ready to action tasks view, to see what things are available for you to work on, and you would pick most likely the highest priority item from here, whatever the thing that you want to work on immediately. The other way in which you can figure out what you should work on is by using the contexts view. And this uses the context that we assign to each task that we create, and this is another powerful feature of the GTD system. So for example, let's say I know that I'll be spending time with my wife in the next hour or so, and then I can look at the context, see what are some of the things that I need to discuss with her, and make sure that I discuss them. Or if I'm going shopping, for instance, I can then look at the shopping context, see which of these I can potentially get to while I'm out shopping, and so on. Right. And so that's how you sort of get to tasks, how you figure out what you need to do. And finally, there is the last step in the GTD process, at least as how I use it, is the reflect part, which is something that you also do regularly. The GTD book, I think, advises once a week. I started out doing it once a week. I did that for a few months, but I think not a few months. I think like a year and a half into doing it every week, I figured out that for me, doing the reflection step once a month was more than enough. That's just a consequence of how I am using the system, how the system works for me, plus just the number of things that I need to do. The list of things that I need to do is not huge. So for me, reflecting on my system once a month is enough. Other people you'll figure out your own cadence over time. So my suggestion would be start doing it once a week, and then you'll very soon realize if that is enough for you, or if that's too much. So based on that, you can change that. So how do you do the reflect stage? Well, the way I kind of go through it is, if you look at the getting thing, how to use this template page, there's a few steps that you follow into 3 sections. Get clear, which means process inbox. This is again just the clarify and the organize steps, but this is a reminder to do this when you're doing the reflect step as well. So once a month, I go through my inbox just to make sure that it's cleared. Process physical entry. This is just something specific to me. Anytime that I get any bills or letters or something, I put them in a physical inbox, which I have sitting next to my from my home office. And once a month, I go through it. I either shed what I don't need, make copies of what I do need, and maybe respond to things that need responses to. Process email inbox. Now I'm doing this process. I'm going through my email inbox multiple times a day, but at the end of every month, I like to go through my inbox and see either and try to reach inbox 0 essentially, right? Like where I respond to things that I need to respond to, archive or delete emails that I don't need anymore, or just capture information, for instance, for tasks that are sitting in my email inbox, and put them in my GTD system so that I can get to them later. And finally, there's the dump ideas and thoughts into Notion inbox. This is essentially where you give yourself time, say 10-15 minutes. You think about stuff that you might have missed, that you think you need to do, and then you add those to your inbox. And then they'll again be sort of processed when you do the clarify and organize step once a day or a couple of times a week. Then there's the get current section. And this is where you're sort of going through, this is sort of the cleaning part of the GTD system. This is where you go through your tasks and your projects, and then you figure out what's already been done, so I can mark it as done, what projects are completed, so I can mark those as completed, and a bunch of other stuff. So let's take this step by step. So review next actions at start of month, remove any tasks that are completed or no longer relevant. Pretty self-explanatory. You go to the template, you go into tasks, and then you just look at the ready to action things, and then you tick off any that you've already done, or you delete any that you think you no longer need to get to, so things that are irrelevant, for instance. Review past month in GTD calendar and Apple Calendar. That's specifically for me, but Apple Calendar, and add next actions as needed. What this means is you go into a calendar view, you look at what, so let's, I mean, there won't be anything for today, but let's say you look at the past month of in this calendar, and you look at what tasks were supposed to happen on each day, on each of those days, and maybe there are some tasks that required some follow-ups, and maybe you forgot to add those follow-ups to your inbox, or maybe you've thought of something else since then, and so this serves as kind of a reminder of what you've worked on in the past month, and based on that you might add new tasks to your inbox. A review upcoming month, this is similar, where you look at what's coming up in the next month, and based on those things you might need to do some preparation, and so you then add those tasks to your GTD system, and so that you're ready for certain tasks or certain days. Review waiting for list. Now this is where the waiting for status comes in. So for instance, as we discussed earlier, you might be waiting on a colleague to respond to you or complete some work before you can do your part on a project. So because you're doing this once a week, you're then going through this list of things that you are waiting for someone else on, and then based on that you can either send them a reminder, or maybe they've already completed the task, and so you can just mark that as done, and then you're ready to proceed for whatever the next task is in that project. Create task to follow up when necessary, you can also do that, and review current projects. What that means is because in the GTD system, something that's very important is each project should have a clear next step. Now it might happen that as you're using this system throughout the week or throughout the month, you complete certain tasks, and then there's no next task left for a project, or a project is, let's say, completed and it has no next tasks. So in this step you would go into your projects list, you would look at everything that's, let's say, in progress, and if you see that this project is either completed, you would then mark it as done, or if you see that the last thing that you needed to do, the previous action that you had to take, you've already done that, you then think about what needs to happen next, like what is the next step that you need to take to move this project closer to completion, and then you would add that here, and you would do this for each of the projects that are either in progress, to make sure that you have a clear next step for every project in your system. And finally, there is the get creative step in this reflection part of GTD, where first of all you review the things in your someday maybe list, and these are things that, like I mentioned, these are aspirational tasks, for instance, that you might want to do someday. You go through these, and as you start using your system, this list eventually gets large, right? But life happens, priorities change, there are things that might no longer be relevant, there are things that you might no longer be interested in, and so you either remove those things from here, or you might have now found time to work on some of these things that you wanted to, maybe start a new hobby that you thought you should, and then you can move this task into the planned status, or you can sort of create a new project based on this or whatever. You can start working on these things that you thought maybe you should someday work on, and then remove that from here. And yeah, the last step is, if there are any other things that you want to add to your someday maybe list, this is why this is the get creative step, where anything that you might want to do in the future, any hobbies you might want to start, any subjects that you might want to learn about, you can add to the someday maybe list, and so that it's captured there for whenever you have time to go through that. And yeah, so I think that's that sort of the end of this video. uh, I know it's a slightly long video, it's 30 minutes. I hope this was useful to someone. If you have any questions, I'd love to hear your comments. I'll be posting this on a couple of channels, on YouTube, on Twitter. So if you have any comments, please just leave them there. I'd love to hear from you. And I'll also include a link to where you can get this template for free. And if you find this useful, I'd love to hear feedback from you. Thank you so much. Have a nice day.